Again, my name is Sarah Collins, and I'm an attorney in Louisville. And I gotta be honest, I am the least tech-savvy person that is my age probably anywhere. It is about all I can do to email and do very basic social media. And so it's kind of interesting that this has become such an area of focus for me. But one night in November 2022, I got home late from the office and I happened to check my email as soon as I got home. And I saw an email from a woman in Louisville who was the victim of sexual extortion. Now, this was really unusual because the intake calls that come to our office never ever go directly to me. I never ever see the emails, I never get the calls. It goes to a group of intake workers, and then everything is filtered and I then have a smaller pool to look from. But this was different. For some reason, I got this email. And this woman said that she had been in court that day where her perpetrator, who had sexually extorted her, was sentenced to a little over a year in prison. And he had not only done this to her, he had done this to 5 women that he was prosecuted for, and it's believed that he's had up to 25 victims. I immediately called her back, and I learned what sexual extortion was for the first time. She was laying in bed one night, that state between asleep and awake, where everything is really foggy. And she received a text message purporting to be from her Snapchat, the Snapchat security team. And it said, "Your account has been compromised. Press the letter Y to secure your account. Press in, otherwise." And she entered Y. And the alleged Snapchat security team asked for her password, and she was half asleep, and she gave it to them. Moments later, a sexually explicit picture of herself came up on her phone. She had made this image a couple weeks earlier on vacation with her longtime boyfriend. She had never made an image like that before. It was a video. She did not share it with anyone. She made it through Snapchat. That's why it was saved. But it was not public. It had not been shared, even with her boyfriend. And she never thought about it. Immediately, the person who got into her account unlawfully sent her the image, and then he started sending her mother's name and phone number and address. He knew her father. He knew her friends. He knew where she lived. He knew what she did for a living. He knew that she was a JCPS high school teacher. And he knew who her principal was. And he had her principal's phone number. And he threatened to send the image to the JCPS superintendent. And he started calling her terrible names and demanding that she send him nude images or else. He threatened to post the picture online. He threatened to send this to her mother. And what was so bad, as it was a video, if you send the video, the first screen you see, even if you don't press play, was my client engaged in a sex act. No matter if she told her friends to block this number, if she warned her friends, do not open anything you receive, it wouldn't have mattered. And what if her high school students saw it? It would be the end of her career. It would have been the end of everything she had worked so hard for. She was 26 years old, an extremely smart woman, and loved being a teacher. The night this first happened, she called LMPD, and 2 officers were dispatched to her house. They had no idea what to do with this, and they told her to call the sex crimes unit, which she immediately did. And she left about 10 messages on the sex crimes unit's voicemail until she could not leave a voicemail because voicemail was full. It happened during the protest, and the sex crimes detectives were sent to work protest. There was no one in the sex crimes unit to take her call. After desperately trying and leaving messages and trying to get help, she was hopeless. Meanwhile, every day, multiple times a day, she was being harassed by this person, maybe more than one person. She had no idea. He told her he lived less than 10 miles from her. She had no idea why he was targeting her. It could be somebody that she knew. Everywhere she went, everyone she saw could have been the person to do this to her. She didn't want to leave the house. She could not block the phone because he kept sending it from different numbers over and over and over. She had already called the police and was not getting help. And eventually she became suicidal. She was deeply, deeply depressed, and she saw no way out of this. For months, she had messages calling her vulgar, disgusting names as she begged this man, please leave me alone. Just move on. I'm not sending you these images. Can you please just leave me alone? I can't send you images. I have a boyfriend. Please stop doing this to me. And after a few months, one day, the messages stopped, and she had no idea why. Fast forward almost a year, she was teaching one day in class. She's an English teacher. And she got a text message that said, "This is the FBI and we are at your door." Well, after what she had been through, she did not believe it and was pretty angry and said, "This isn't the FBI. The FBI's never going to text me." And her mother called her about 10 minutes later and said, "Yes, the FBI is at our house. This is serious." What she did not know, and in all of these months was constantly terrified that these messages would resume and that these pictures would be out there. I do want to make it clear, even though the messages stopped, she still got no rest because she was terrified at any minute the pictures would pop up on social media for her students to see. As it turned out, the FBI found her information while they were investigating her perpetrator. He made the mistake of trying to do the same thing with a UK cheerleader. And you don't mess with UK cheerleaders. When the young woman, who's less than 5 foot tall, about 100 pounds, and is as feisty as she can be, when she received the message from him that he had an image of her, she said she had been watching the show Catfished on MTV, and she decided to turn it around on him. And so she said, "Sure, I'd like to play along, but I'm at a family funeral. Can you give me a few days?" So he said yes. And she called the Lexington Police Department. And within a very short amount of time, Brian Wilson from Bullitt County was discovered to be the person who sextorted this UK cheerleader, multiple other UK athletes, multiple other women, and my client. My client did not know his name for many months. She knew he had been arrested. And she even saw an article in the paper that sounded a lot like some of the things he had done. One of his MOs was to create a collage of images of his victims and send them to the victims. And he had done that, and this is described in the paper. So she called the FBI and said, "Is this the guy who did this to me?" And they still wouldn't tell her until she walked into court to face her perpetrator. She did not know his name. And that day, she learned his name was Brian Wilson, and she also learned he was a Louisville Metro police officer. He had used LMPD equipment to find her family's names and phone numbers, to find out what she did, to find this vast amount of information he used to blackmail her with this image. We're unsure of what drew him to her specifically. It could be anything. We have a few ideas, but are not certain. But Brian Wilson at that time had been under investigation by LMPD for 1 year for posting sexually explicit pictures of himself in uniform with another officer. And during that time, he was still allowed to have access to Accurate. Now, I want to be very clear. He could have done this even if he had not been a police officer. It's shocking, it's disgusting, it is more outrageous that he is, because the very person who was sworn to protect her was her perpetrator. But I have in my office Accurant's sister program, Lexis. I can find the same information as Accurant uses. Because I'm a lawyer, private investigators have access to this. And actually, probably any of you who want to go home and pay the money can have access to these types of programs. He didn't have to be in law enforcement. It was just handy for him to do that. And even with simple Google searches, you can find out a whole lot about people. Brian Wilson was also, after they found his computer and they were searching the FBI, they found videos of Brian and other members of the 9th Mobile Division throwing slushies on people. And that became known in the media as Slushygate. So all you heard for a year was these officers are throwing slushies on unhoused people. And that is awful. That is so cruel. That indicates a very disturbed personality. And in no way do I mean to minimize that. But that's mostly what you heard about Brian Wilson in the news. And almost all news broadcasts left out the fact, and hey, this was discovered when we found evidence that he was sexually extorting 25 women. And that's why the lady that later became known as Jane Doe called me. She said, I don't want money. I really don't even know why I'm calling you. But justice wasn't done today. And people don't know what this is. And if they do, they think it only happens to children and teens. And it doesn't. So we filed a lawsuit, and LMPD settled very quickly. And my client, I'm happy to report, thanks to therapy and a great support system, is doing really, really well. And if it wasn't for the fact she would have to disclose her identity to come here today, she would love to be here with you today to tell her story, because she is determined to use what happened to her for good instead of the evil that was perpetrated against her. It's my understanding that in June, Brian Wilson will get out of prison. And it's also my understanding when he does, he can get on his smartphone and get on the internet and get on a dating app. And he can get on social media sites. And he can purchase software. Just because he's a cop doesn't mean he doesn't have access to information. And there is nothing preventing him from doing this crime again, and that's wrong. We are learning more every day. You don't have to have a sexually explicit image to be the victim of this. You know, most parents today tell their children, do not sext. Once you have an image out there, you can't get it back. You don't have to have an image out there. AI is being used to create images. All they need is your face. and a sexually explicit image can be made of you. This literally could happen to anybody in this room, any of your wives, any of your children, or your grandchildren. Just last week, a teacher in Louisville was arrested for taking yearbook pictures and making sexually explicit pictures of children. That will continue to happen, and children and adults will be blackmailed with those issues. And what happens now when you're a teenager who you've told over and over, images can never be retracted, do not sext? What happens when the worst happens? In South Carolina, just a few weeks ago, a state legislator's son killed himself. He thought he was texting with a young girl, but he was texting with a perpetrator, and he sent nude images, and he was blackmailed, and he thought there was no way out. There is, and there are things that can be done for people who are in this situation, but as long as we tell children and community members that this is the worst thing that can ever happen to them because it will always be online, you take away the power this community has to fight these perpetrators. Because there are things you can do. If this happens, you should immediately call 1-800-CALL-FBI. The FBI can take swift action, can have pictures removed from the internet. It is true, you never know who has things on their phone and things like that, but when images pop up, there are ways the FBI can combat them. And there are ways these perpetrators can be found and prosecuted. But currently, under federal law and state law, there is no law that adequately addresses sextortion, because sextortion is currently prosecuted and sued under a patchwork of laws that don't really fit what it is. Brian Wilson was prosecuted for stalking. And that doesn't even go anywhere near the heart of the harm he did to her. Sextortion has often been referred to as cyber rape. And I can't think of a better description because it is extremely violating. The psychological harm of sex crimes is the lasting impact perpetrators leave, and that happens to these victims as well. Under current laws, Brian Wilson is able, after he is released, to get online. He doesn't have to register as a sex offender. If you understand anything about sexual extortion or sexual exploitation, you recognize this is 100% a sex crime. And we have to demand that our laws reflect that. 17 states have now enacted laws to protect citizens, given this discrepancy and this gap between federal laws and state laws. 17 states have enacted laws to protect people and adequately address crimes of sexual extortion. And now there is a bill in Kentucky, Senate Bill 181, that I'm so thankful to have been a part of, promoting a little bit of drafting, and I will be really excited to take this to Frankfurt. It is sponsored by Senator Julie Rocky Adams, and it makes the crime of sextortion a Class D felony in Kentucky, at least. There are enhancements that would make it a Class C felony. It terms sextortion as a sex crime. So people convicted of sextortion will be on the sex offender registry, and their ability to get online after release is restricted. And if they improperly access the internet, that is a separate crime. For so many reasons, this bill is needed. And I'm really proud to say that Kentucky so far has been a leader in protecting our citizens against internet predators and sexual predators. We were one of the first states to pass what's become known as the revenge porn bill, sending sexually explicit pictures without someone's consent. We were the first state to adopt an anti-doxing statute. But this is of vital importance. We are in a state of emergency regarding sextortion because the numbers are increasing every single day. And it's important that we have the right legal framework to be able to work through, but also that our population is educated to know what this is and what to do when it happens. This has never been anything I would have imagined working with. I really was confused when she first called me. But this heartbreaking situation has made me learn so much more about this truly awful crime. And there are things that we can do. So I ask all of you to sign this petition. It will be out front to criminalize sextortion, to pass Senate Bill 181. And I ask each of you to call your legislators and let them know, demand that this bill be passed. Tell your family and friends, and educate yourself about internet safety, and educate yourselves, your children, and your grandchildren about what to do if this happens.